Thank you very much, everyone. Thank you for choosing this to be your session of choice before lunch. I hope you're not too starving and we can keep you entertained for the next half an hour, 40 minutes. I'd like to welcome James Kirkham, Copper 90, Mike Norrish from BT Sports, Paul Rayner from Sport Bible, and Robbie Lyle from Arsenal Fan TV.
They're all clapping you.
That was a very small round of applause. Come on, do better than that. Thank you very much. Before we talk about the future of fan-generated content, I think it's important to understand kind of where we've come from, where we are now as well, to put it into some context. So years gone by, we've had fans joining in via radio phone-in shows, 606, in the stadium, early days of the internet, the fan forums, and then smartphone and kind of better broadband, 4G has really lowered the barrier for entry. So you could say there's more opportunity for everyone to become a publisher. And you record a video at a game, post it on any social media channel, even record podcasts. It's that easy these days. If I can do it, literally anyone can do it. So I want to start off with just finding out what from the panel do you think define as fan-generated content? And there's a good point to start off. Who wants to pick that one up? Go on, James.
Go on, James.
Well, Copper 90 started life being entirely fan-centric. So 6 years ago, it turned the cameras around onto the fans, and then it was seen as quite new and novel doing that, and people were surprised that you could supposedly start a football business without showing any football, but that was very much its kind of part. And I think that really helps you define, therefore, what fan content is, because Copper 90 probably editorializes it much more than some of the stuff we might hear about today. We curate parts, we've got a network of fans who effectively work on our behalf. But ultimately, for us, it always comes down to authenticity and what is real and what is true, and that's where the whole kind of process begins. Now, I think there is a huge kind of plethora of fan content out there. There are loads of different layers. There's the stuff like Robbie's going to be speaking about, and then there's the stuff where I guess the likes of ourselves, where we bring it in and start incorporating it within actually the wider mix of media. So it might be filmic pieces outside stadia, it might be eventizing a kind of a big final, for example, and that might be where you leverage fans, as we call them, creators, and bring them into content that you're already going to make. So there's a big, wide mix out there, and I think it's really worth exploring.
How do you use it, Mike?
Yeah,
How do you define?
I guess it's relatively easy to define from a BT point of view, because it's the distinction between our pundits and our talent, who are largely ex-players, and then the fans who are going to matches, who are consuming matches, might be customers, might not be, and they're bringing a completely different point of view to someone who's played for Liverpool 500 times. So what we're looking to do is to marry those two experiences. So the pundits and the experts that we have clearly have a value, and that value is insight, expertise, first-hand stories from what it's like to play for Sir Alex Ferguson, which is obviously interesting. But then what we're looking for the fans to do is bring in a completely different perspective on that. So what's it like to support Arsenal for the last 15 years when the club have struggled, or what's it like to be a Burnley fan when you beat Chelsea on the first game of the season? And that is a completely different viewpoint to what our talent and our experts have. So we think and we believe that, but by marrying the two together, we get a much richer, rounder view of what football is. It's not just the sort of pundits from on high talking about, in a sort of close and quite closed way about their own experiences. We hope to provide a much richer, fuller experience for our customers about what a Saturday actually feels like. So it's not just it's not just the experts. It's much more about the fans. But for us, it's about the blend of the two.
Was that a key point of difference in terms of when you launched in 2013? What can we do different that's already out there from a Sky Sports or a BBC? Because you had the kind of social media wall in the background, didn't you? That really tried to tap into that fan sentiment.
I mean, we tried a lot of things in 2013. Not all of them came off. But I think one of the lasting values that we tried to bring in was, as you said, as a point of difference, was trying to break down this kind of old media way of preaching to people about in this case football. You know, we really wanted to bring in fans right from the start, and BT Sport was and still is serious about taking sport back to the fans. We make we gave away BT Sport free for the first number of years, and we still, last season with the Champions League final, Europa League final, we made these games free and available to all as well. So there is a history of us trying to sort of open up football and disrupt the way that football has been talked about and broadcast, and that I think we're very proud of the way that we started doing that, and I think editorially in shows like Premier League Tonight, where the fans really drive the agenda of that show, I think it's given us something different. I think it's marked out our territory versus Sky and the BBC and other incumbents.
And Paul, with Sport Bible, which is obviously a spin-off and developed from Lad Bible, which is very much developed around fan-generated content in essence, not necessarily football from a lot of it, but taking content that's already out there and utilising it. It's obviously a massive part of what you've done previously.
Absolutely, it's very much our business really, and Sport Bible was launched 4 years ago, about a year after Lad Bible, and that came around. It was before my time actually, but it came around because we currently receive 1,000 videos a day sent to us. Sometimes more, sometimes less, but on average 1,000 a day. And so many of those were sport related that it was clearly the right thing to do. To be fair, we could launch the Cat Bible and the Dog Bible as well. We probably won't, but we got so much that it clearly was the right thing to do. But the timing was right as well for us as well. I think we're at an interesting time where fans and consumers' interpretation of punditry has changed, and there's probably an equal value on what someone that Robbie's interviewing outside the ground as to what someone that's, like Mike was mentioned, has played 500 times for Liverpool. So that democratisation of sport has worked really well for us, because now we receive a huge amount of this fan-generated content and we can distribute it, and people are very receptive to what their peers have to say about sports, particularly in regard to the latest issue or the game last night. And I know I might be skipping ahead here, but I think next summer's World Cup is going to be fascinating in regards to the role that fan-generated content has within that. And for us, it couldn't be better timing, really.
Robbie, you're kind of the epitome of fan-generated content, starting out as a massive Arsenal fan, looking at it and saying, right, where's our voice gone? How can we make ourselves heard? And you take the step into bridging that gap. What's the kind of story behind how you started off and how that's changed over the last few years?
Well, started off really massive Arsenal fan, as you just said, and I went to Arsenal, watch Arsenal week in, week out, season ticket holder, and I always just used to feel that you never heard anything from the fans. You heard from ex-players, you heard from the players, you heard from the club, but you never ever heard anything from the fans. And I felt that there was no value on the fans. It's just like the fans are just a commodity. Come there, spend your money, and that's it. See you later. And I wanted to sort of create a platform where ordinary fans, no matter who you are, whether you're a rich fan, poor fan, white, black, female, as long as you support Arsenal, you could have a voice. You could talk about your team. You could talk about how you felt the team performed. And literally, it was as simple as that. I just wanted to create a platform that would give fans a voice. And I think we've managed to achieve that. And week in, week out, we go to games and we just get the opinions of ordinary fans on how they think the team has performed. And it's real. It's not contrived, it's not faked, it's not put together, it's real emotions, real reactions to how the team has performed. And yeah, it was as simple as that.
Can I just add something on this? I think one of the most interesting things here that has happened recently is Gary Neville going to Arsenal TV. That is just fascinating. And we were talking earlier before, a couple of years ago, that would never have happened. Yeah. 5 years ago, you wouldn't have been able to imagine it happen. And for Gary Neville, well-renowned pundit, to go on and defend himself to some extent with you guys, I just thought was really interesting. It felt like a tipping point. It really did.
Yeah.
Do you want to give a bit of background on how that came about?
Yeah, well, how that sort of came about is we had a game where we played against Chelsea, which is normally a recipe for disaster when Arsenal go to Stamford Bridge and play. we got absolutely hammered, and there was a lot of very angry fans after the game reacting to the result. And Gary Neville was coming out of the ground, and he said that he saw some of the fans, which they weren't actually, the fans that he saw weren't actually the fans we were interviewing. And he made a comment that he said that he felt it was embarrassing, the way that they were talking about the manager and stuff, the team's performance. He felt it was embarrassing. I kind of took a bit of exception to that, because I felt for a while that a lot of times the traditional media was sort of looking down at what we did, sort of like, oh yeah, they're fans, what do they know, sort of thing. So I took exception to that. I was like, why is it embarrassing for a fan who's spent his hard-earned money, who's travelled, who's gone to that game to see a horrible performance? Why is that embarrassing for him to have a reaction to it? So, to cut a long story short, we kind of went back and forth on Twitter, a bit of a beef between us, arguing, and then Sky got in contact and said, listen, would you like to sit down with Gary and talk? Because Gary is a guy that, you know, he does like fans. He does, throughout his career, he's always had a connection with the fans. So he'd like to. So we got together in a room. I brought a couple of the fans with me that had actually spoken, and we sat down and we filmed it, and we spoke about, you know, fans. Why are fans not valued enough? We spoke about modern media and this sort of new form of media, and it was a very, very interesting video. And fair play to him, he was. I felt that he was very good on it. He defended himself, but it was great. I thought it was great that you sort of had like the traditional media meeting the new media and sort of discussing and talking about the changes in football, because I suppose years ago. There was no platform for an ordinary fan, but it has all changed now. There is numerous platforms for which an ordinary fan can have his say on football, and why shouldn't he? Because, you know, they are part of this multi-million-pound industry, and for years they've been looked down upon, almost like there's no value to fans. You know, big company, TV company wants to change the time of a football game, just changes it. Doesn't matter that the fans won't be able to get home. You know, it's just little things like that. So at least now a fan can talk about it and say, well, what about us?
And with Copper 90, it was originally set up kind of for the fans, by the fans, was the kind of main strap line. How do you feel that's grown? Because you've gone from, say, Poet and Vooch, who've been there since the start, being fans, an Arsenal fan, Liverpool fan, to them growing up, and now you're getting the likes of Paul Bogba, Stormzy, getting access to all these people. Do you see yourself getting kind of more accepted, as Robbie's getting more accepted with getting access to people like Gary Neville?
I think, yeah, you know, at its heart is a similar belief that you just think there's a different way of doing things, and perhaps the kind of staid, traditional manner in which, you know, football was always seen or consumed has been broken, and that's exciting. The majority of it is down to a couple of things. One, it's about the technology involved, and two, it's about the punter, the fan. And the fan basically drives everything. They're so empowered, technologically speaking, they will choose on what terms, when they want to consume stuff, on whatever platform, in what form. Subsequently, I think anyone who can kind of address that and leverage that is in a strong position. So yeah, you know, whether it be a show like Comments Below, which Poet and Vooch host every Monday, you know, rather than maybe just kind of reading out a solitary treat, that's an entirely fan-driven show. Every single question is born from fans from the outset, and it always has been. So it's a reactive review show of the previous weekend, very polemic, very kind of polarizing, and it has to have that sort of flavor because that's what people get attracted to. I think the talent point is particularly interesting because, yeah, if we had, whether we be Beckham or last summer or Pogba a few weeks ago, Stormzy, we got Liam on in a couple of weeks, people like the accessibility, I believe, that it gives you. People like Poet and Vooch are able perhaps to break down barriers and let people feel at ease and maybe give players, talent, musicians, artists a certain kudos to be a part of it because they can act more themselves, they can act in a more human way. People search and seek out that naturalness, that authenticity, that human kind of quality rather than just thinking this feels like a very typical press interview.
And how does BT develop with something like that? Do you work closely with people like Robbie's of the world the Copper 90s of the world to try and get that authentic bit, because we know that TV audiences are getting older and older, especially within football, and it needs addressing.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, we have worked with James in Copper 90. We've worked with Arsenal Fan TV. I think the really good opportunity for us then, as James sort of mentioned, is when you see Poet and Vuj do a football interview. That's very different to when a BT or a BBC presented as a football interview. And one of the challenges for us as a broadcaster who wants to make interesting content is, if you go to interview Paul Pogba at Manchester United, that's quite a controlled environment. It's quite difficult to create something really interesting, or something. I guess what you're really looking for is something which Pogba's relaxed and is able to, his personality, which is great and fascinating, is able to come across. So it is a challenge, because the clubs are very controlling. Club media departments are quite want to have clearance over a lot of these things. So I think the interview, which is a staple of TV, is something which we're really constantly looking to try and evolve. And a lot of the interviews which we've done over the last season have been, we do them on Facebook Live, for example. So rather than having a traditional turn up at this time, say these 3 questions, the 2 good ones get struck off, and then you go back and edit them. Doing it live means that the fans are asking the questions. There's a real interaction there. We did a great one with Wenger, actually, when he really opened up. It was a lot more. I don't want to say silly, but it was a lot more fun and light than a normal interview. We're not looking for the line. We're not looking for that back page of the Sun kind of headline. We are actually just looking for personality or fun, or and that for us is a much more successful interview than that kind of sit down Frost Nixon kind of head to head, because that never happens in football. When do you ever get a really kind of hard hitting interview where a manager reveals something which he didn't think he was going to reveal at the start of it? It just doesn't happen, and so you want to give those players an opportunity to get their personalities across, and these guys have done that brilliantly. But I think that's the way forward.
I think a company like Copper 90, arguably someone like a Sport Bible, you're quite lucky as well, because we can try stuff out perhaps more rapidly than the giant kind of organisations who still have an awful lot of things you have to first tick a box on to make sure you're right. Whereas we can kind of try something out. We can try getting a format out for a messenger bot a year before most other people, or even a show like we make, like FIFA and Chill, is a pretty loose interview format. Kind of works now, and people playing FIFA while they're talking to one another, as it happens, is brilliant for breaking down barriers. But they're not always easy to just be able to try something like that. And I don't think one's bad and one's good. I think it's the fact there's a lovely rich tapestry now available to a punter, and that fan is in complete control, and that fan will decide what kind of works for them and in what mix that they want to kind of get hold of.
And as you go forward, if you're getting more and more access, is there a danger that you're kind of moving away from where you started and where the fan is, and that kind of content, and getting too much into the celebrified and almost the fan getting left behind? Is that a danger that you're concerned of?
I think if that happened, we wouldn't do it, yeah.
But there is a danger of that, and on a Sport Bible, 10.5 million Facebook followers, loads of football followers, exactly the same as on Copper 90. So we get footballers contacting us directly, and then so we're thinking, well, are they a fan? Are they contacting us as a fan of Sport Bible? Because they're trying to promote their own cause. In one famous player's case, he's trying to promote his wife's nutrition business, which is a bit weird through us. But you have to be careful with it, and increasingly the commercialisation of fan-generated content. If we're not all careful here, we're going to move away from the original ethos of it, which was someone with their phone filming something, sending it in reaction to something that's happening on their point of it. And increasingly, as we and others commercialise it, we may move away from that and end up almost back where we are. So it's a very fine line to be drawn, and it'll be interesting where we are in a couple of years' time. I think really interesting. It's going to be, like I said, with the World Cup coming up, how people are attempting to monetise that fan-generated content, or to slightly fake it, which I know that's brands that don't have the distribution, or FMCG or whatever that are trying to fake it. You're already seeing it creeping into TV adverts. That is not where we want to go. You know, advertorial is really not where we want to go.
And Robbie, how do you keep that authentic approach that you've built such a massive following and devoted following, but at the same time it's your full-time business?
Yeah, I mean,
there's a line to tread, isn't there?
Again, my philosophy is just be real, and if it's real, I honestly feel that with the sort of content that we do, if it's real, football fans will accept it, and I do think football fans will see through things that are not real. They really do see through it. So for us, it's just about being real. It's just about keeping it simple and doing what we've always done, which is, you know, having our emphasis is on fans. And I think as long as we do that, I do agree with you that there are a lot of changes. But I think as long as we are authentic with what we're doing, I think we'll have no problems.
As the kind of barriers to entry get lower and platforms increase in number, I mean, we've got kind of Snapchat that a lot of you guys kind of utilise these days as well. You've got to be across multiple platforms. Yeah. Do you see fans having the same opportunities to become the next Robbie at the same time, or is it getting harder at the same time?
Yeah. The only thing is as soon as fans get that voice, which is so important, and they will find a way, which is absolutely right. But likewise, fans still naturally seek an editor of choice. They still want to be kind of steered through content because there is simply so much. So you still want to kind of tie your flag, and it might be an Arsenal fan TV, and it's like, do you know what, I'm going to religiously watch that, and that's your thing. You might have 2 or 3 of those that are in your, you know, utility belt of stuff that you go to on any given day to find out about football. But you will still make those choices. It isn't just kind of many millions and this kind of utterly random act of sort of finding something. And that's why these guys will, you know, still continue to produce and editorialise, because guess what? People do want to hear it from Gary Lineker, or they do want to hear it from Gary's Twitter, and that's kind of fine too. So it's getting increasingly easy to actually craft and make stuff and put it out there, but there will in no sense be any kind of stop in the short term of people seeking a bit of editorial involvement too from a Copper or a BT or an Arsenal fan TV, I think, to give them that extra elevation or put it in the right kind of context.
So is it getting harder to actually find and stand out? So if I wanted to kind of post some things and become an ex-Robbie and I want to post, is that kind of getting lost in the noise, you think?
I don't know if it's getting harder to stand out. I think what's interesting now, as you say, as the number of fans or the number of platforms or the size of these communities grows, is trying to, from our point of view, is trying to not just look for the Robbie or the sort of popular face of, is to really try and, in almost like a sort of election reporting way, is to try and take the temperature of a group as a whole. You know, the most common question I get as a head of digital from a producer of a show is, what do the fans think? And they don't mean, what does this fan think? They mean as a whole. And obviously that's sort of impossible to know, because there's, like any sample...
Is that hard to filter as well? Because, you know, not everything's positive.
Yeah, exactly. So like any sort of sample size, there's lots of discrepancies within that and differences. But I think if you look at over time, as what we're trying to do over the course of a season, how are those kind of conversations going? What is the mood of an Arsenal fan at the moment versus the start of the transfer window, for example? And then you can start to look at these huge data sets, which we all have access to, and start to make some sense out of that. And I think sport and football is not really tapped into that in a great way. You know, there's lots of kind of channels you can go to or shows you can watch which will tell you about Opta stats or tell you about what a player does. But if you look at, you know, 60,000 Arsenal fans at the ground, or whatever there is, 500,000 Arsenal fans in London, and looking at all of those interactions on Facebook, on Snapchat, on Twitter, and then trying to tell what is essentially sort of data stories from that, I think that takes it on to another level, and that's kind of what we're trying to do now with some of the social media tools that we work with. And I think that's really, really exciting. If you look at kind of where, you know, election reporting has got to, I think if you look at that could really be a next stage of this. You know, yes, the individual fan having his say, or having a rant, or celebrating a goal in a compelling and extreme way, but also looking at that bigger bulk of data is really interesting.
I think that's a lovely point. The depth of fan involvement is maybe something that people haven't touched, and is where you will get increased opportunities. So rather than just reactive, and rather than just, as Mike says, kind of the rant, like we have our creator network, which has got like 1,000 fans around the world, which continually grow. They're both in front of and behind the camera, but they end up a continual cultural temperature check. So you can go to Doha tomorrow and find out genuinely how they're feeling about Champions League, or you can go to Santiago in Chile and find out what they're feeling about the World Cup and get those kind of video pieces back almost overnight. Now there's commercial worth to that, but ultimately there's distribution worth to, editorial, so you have that continual kind of sense check of what's real. And I really love that point that, whether it be stuff like that or whether it be the kind of data they're kind of using and leveraging, there's definitely a depth there and a future beyond just, oh my God, United were terrible this weekend, which is still a wonderful grab-all kind of audience piece, but maybe there's more too.
Is that because we naturally go towards those because they get the biggest reactions? So, I mean, Paul, from what fans are saying, what kind of content works best do you see?
Sorry, do you mean like in reactive?
Yeah, because you tend to get, you've got your rant videos, which are always going to be popular because they've got to have an emotion almost, haven't they?
Yeah, absolutely. And we see peaks and troughs, and you see fads come and go, and it's interesting how quickly a style of reaction comes and it goes. So I think we've seen quite a lot of mimicry of some of the Arsenal fan TV is a good example. We're seeing a lot of reaction piece that is getting really excitable because people are into that. Whether that will continue or slightly to go more sort of not professional but less excitable over the future, we don't know. But from our point of view, it's the volume of it that is hard for people that don't work in the industry to understand. The volume of fan content is so high that you get such a wide spectrum of it. We're being asked, by brands like the NFL, who we work with commercially, to curate the content that we get sent about American football and to create some of theirs as well, and then to boil that down into the message that they want to put out. And obviously the aim of that is to promote American football. The volume of it is staggering, and the breadth of it is staggering due to that volume. It's not all of the highest quality, obviously. There is quite a wide variance in quality, I think, is what I would say.
Robbie, do you incorporate other Arsenal fans into yours? So you've got kind of the people that you interview straight after a match, for example.
Yeah,
How do you find other people and incorporate them into what you're doing?
That's just the people that we interview after match is just one aspect of what we do. So, if you watch Arsenal Fan TV, we have programs every day throughout the week. It's not just about after the games. We obviously do a lot of stuff around games, but for instance, right throughout the summer, every single day, we've had a dedicated transfer program, which has averaged over 100,000 views.
I bet that's been popular on the Arsenal.
It's been very popular. That's averaged over 100,000 views. It's averaged over 100,000 views every single day. And basically, again, we get fans involved. Who would you like to see us sign? And that's been going, that show started from May when the season finished, and it went right up until last week on the 31st. So we do lots and lots of shows. It's not just about reactions, and we're also, I think the other thing about us is that we're there. We're there if we win, if we lose, if we draw. We're not just there for the glamour ties, we're there for everything. And I think if you do that, the fans really start to respect you. They're like, you're always there, it's real, I know that I can always get there. There's always going to be some views on Arsenal. I think it's about being consistent with content, and that's what we try to be. So I think if you just try to just come on and it's all about, I'm going to try and get a rant, people will see through that very, very quickly, and that sort of, that will not play. And where it will go in the future, I hear what you guys are saying. I think it will change. I think it will change. It's not going to be the same as what it is now. But I'm just about keeping it real and seeing where it goes.
And there's such a wide, rich tapestry of what that fan can give. So it's really interesting to see how that's going to kind of broaden out. Like, we see huge popularity on fan kind of found content, if you want to call it that, in the scenes that are erupting in stadiums, underneath the tifos, in incredible crowds, the 7 Clásicos of Argentina, and how each of the crowds are comparing with the flares and the pyros. So for us, often those little social nuggets are like little, frankly, periscopes into a moment you just can't see when you're sat there in kind of, Highbury or wherever you are. And that's ultimately fan-driven, but it doesn't necessarily get classed it as such, because that's just people bringing to life what football means to other places in and around the world. So there's a lot there still to be had, I think.
Yeah.
So how do you keep an eye on what's coming up, where the next kind of fan-generated content is going to be? If we're seeing kind of changes to Snapchat, what's happening on Facebook, new platforms coming up, there's always different ways in which people are creative with.
Yeah, Snapchat's a nightmare. It is very difficult to discover content on there, and that's something that they're aware of themselves, but haven't really. So as a sort of someone who's looking across all of these platforms to harness the best content, that's very difficult. But it does require a skill set which is not super common in broadcasting and in production. It's much more akin to kind of data research. So it's not. It's quite tricky. I mean, we lean on partners. We work with a social data company called Spreadfast, who will help you make sense of the social web. But even after that, there requires quite a lot of judgment layer that you take that data and work out what's interesting and what's important, and then you've got to do it in real time as well, from a broadcasting point of view. So it is tricky to keep track of what's going on, and increasingly when we were talking earlier about Snapchat, when the conversation moves away from one platform to another, you can't, and I think what you'll find on Twitter, I think it's fair to say, is that Twitter is now about a certain very loud voices at the risk of drowning out everything else, where other platforms still have perhaps not found that order of hierarchy yet. So you might get more interesting stuff over there, but it's quite difficult to find. What I, again, in my role at BT, if someone's doing the job badly, they'll just tell me what Piers Morgan's tweeting, or and that's not difficult to do. What you want to find is what are the stories behind that, what are the fans who actually go into the game thinking, what are the fans as a whole are thinking, and how is that changing over the course of a season. I think that's what's really interesting to map.
The only build on Snapchat would be, although I completely concur with the means at which you discover, we often find we can use it as almost a nursery slope for emerging talent. So we'll happily go and try out a bunch of people in different parts of the world, frankly, who can take over our Snapchat at a certain time to start effectively screen testing live and seeing how they appear, and then beginning to elevate them maybe into their own shows and stuff. So that's maybe where it does have that, where you can tap into that very visceral feel and start to get to know someone quite quickly.
Conscious we're eating our way into lunchtime. Apologies for the gag. I know there's quite a few kind of clubs, leagues, etc. in here that might be wanting to tap into your expertise. How do you think they can best utilise fan-generated content from whatever point of view? Because I know there's traditionally been certain barriers that have been put up between fan channels and clubs, and we don't want to open the things up too much because we've seen what's happened to other clubs and we don't want to go down there. What's your advice to those?
I think I mentioned it earlier, but I think the NFL 4 or 5 years ago was the most buttoned-down league in the world. For them to come to us and say, we've got this issue, how can you solve it? I think it was just a real indicator of a changing of the guard, basically. And we're continuing to work with them because they know that the reaction and the interaction that we get with fans in regards to American football is the real pulse of the UK market of American football. The interaction and fan reaction that they get direct to NFL.com or whatever other means, via their Twitter accounts, is to the converted. They're preaching to the converted. Whereas with us, obviously we've got people that are into American football, but when we communicate any American football, we get a lot of interesting reaction. And I think that will be a very valuable tool for all leagues and all sports, really. And we get, every day I'll get approached by a different federation, from the very small to the very big, because they understand A, the size of the audience, but B, the fact that as Robbie's mentioned earlier, it's the authenticity of what you do, and sometimes you need to look outside of the people that are already congregating in your church, and you need to look at the people that are in the car park, say, that are interested in sport, but haven't quite committed fully to being one of your income streams, if you want to look at it that way.
I think fans want to be heard, first and foremost, I guess. You know, as Robbie said earlier, you know, there was no platform for fans to be heard when he started that channel. And I don't think fans would expect, you know, if you're a fan of Man United, you don't expect, you know, a sort of Ed Woodward to invite you in and say, who are we going to sign? You know, who do you want me to sign? You don't expect that. You're not stupid, but you don't want to be completely ignored and commoditized. So I think that if you're a club or a brand who's looking to tap into fan content, you have to give fans a chance to be heard, and not be scared of that opinion being off-brand, if you like, because guess what, they're saying it anyway, you're just not putting it onto your channel. So I think that, you know, being a bit more relaxed about fans' opinions and giving them a chance to be heard is really important. And, you know, these conversations are happening all the time anyway, and if you're not channeling those conversations into your brand, it doesn't mean that they're not happening. It doesn't mean that people aren't experiencing these opinions. So you have to be grown up about that and be aware that there is a value that you can harness in letting those fans' opinions be heard, because they will look at you more sympathetically rather than if you're putting your fingers in your ears and pretending, as the NFL did or Man United did for many years, and didn't even acknowledge that those conversations are happening.
I think for me talking about football, massive opportunity for football clubs right now to engage with your fans, right? The fans, as I said, for so many years they've been ignored, and this is a chance, I feel, for clubs to talk to fans. Be a bit more honest with the fans. I mean, if you've just lost 5-0, we don't want to see a car advertised straight after the game. Maybe you should address it. Maybe you should just, I'm not saying after every game, but you can talk to the fans and say, well, you know what, it wasn't a great performance, but we're going to try and do better next. I saw Mesut Ozil the other day after the defeat against Liverpool. He put on his Instagram account the next day, he said, listen, he goes, to the fans who all travelled up there, it was a really poor performance. You know we're all hurting as the players, and we're going to try and put it right in our next game. So straight away, the fans ain't going to attack Mesut Ozil after that. Some of the ex-players did, but the fans were sort of like, all right, fair enough. We can see that Mesut Ozil was unhappy as well about that performance. It weren't just us. He was unhappy as well. But what's happened a lot of times in the past is that players just don't say anything. The club shuts down, everything locks down. They circle the wagons. So then when you do that, everybody starts talking, and the conversation doesn't finish. It goes on without you. And then when it goes on without you, it can run away from you. And I feel that this is a big opportunity for the clubs to really engage with their fans, to really have a better relationship with fans. Because I just feel at the moment, in the Premier League especially, there's a disconnection between fans and football clubs. So you speak to a fan, every fan of every Premier League club can tell you how much their players earn. Because the first thing they'll say is, he missed that chance and he's on 150 grand a week. When you go to Germany, they don't talk about the prices of how much their players earn. And they got a connection with their players, because the clubs are more, I know because the rules are a bit different over there, but the clubs are more connected to their fans. So when I went over to Dortmund last year and I went to a game there, there was a player, Matthias Ginter, who was having a bad time, and my friend who's a season ticket holder at Dortmund was saying to me that the fans are actually chanting deliberate songs to get behind him. You don't see that over here because there's not the connection. And I think that this is the opportunity with the modern day social media. Instead of clubs being against it and being frightened of it, they need to embrace it a bit more, and they can use it to their advantage.
Can I just
and grow a closer relationship with the fans.
just quickly add just a great point about Mesut Ozil? When that came out, we jumped straight on that, and the reaction we got to our news piece of Mesut Ozil holding his hands up saying we were shit was actually really, really decent. And it was interesting that exactly what Robbie says. And for us, it made a news story, which was great. So
He
the
killed
reach
a
of
lot
it,
of it, didn't he? He killed a lot of
Yeah.
people who would come on and say, oh, they don't care. Ozil don't care, he's going on to his house. No, he's told you, I care. I cared about that performance. I cared that we didn't perform. I cared that the fact that a lot of fans came all the way up there on that day and saw us perform so badly. It hasn't got rid of all the people complaining and that, but at least people realise that he cared. And sometimes, that's what I'm saying, there's that disconnection sometimes where fans really don't, for years we've just felt that nobody cares about us. As I said, TV companies don't care about us, they'll just change the times. Oh, we're moving it at 5 o'clock, who cares? Clubs don't care about you, you know, it's just about making money, that is the perception of fans. So, you know, I think clubs, brands use social media as well to your advantage and engage with fans on a genuine level, and you know, you'll see a big difference.
I think it's one thing engaging with fans. The only thing I would add is purely by putting out every piece of fan-driven content, that won't be the answer. That will create a new kind of mess.
No, but I'm just saying, like, be genuine.
Yeah, absolutely.
Obviously, you can't
Authenticity
do it
is
for everything.
yeah.
I'm not saying that, but you know, there's times when you can be, you know, talk to your fans a bit
Absolutely. Clubs should do that all the time and have it act in a
Yeah.
transparent fashion. You just don't want everyone to answer Dan's question, what's the answer? All I would say the slight nuanced thing is, rather than it just being, well, let's stick some fan content out and we're sorted, it's just think, what does the fan actually want? So just having a fan-first strategy will sort that out, because it might be that they want that for part of the time, and then guess what? They want something editorialised or curated or from somewhere else. So it's just having that start point, which actually is more thought rather than just leaping to the kind of content. That's important.
On that point, we're going to wrap up, let you guys go to your lunch. Thank you very much to all the panel members. If you want to catch up with them after, I'm sure they'll be around for questions. Thank you for listening.
Thank you.